On the surface, the world of Pokemon seems simple. You catch a creature, you train it, and you battle until you become the champion. But behind this straightforward adventure lies a web of hidden systems, mysterious quirks, and obscure mechanics that most players never fully notice. These details, often tucked away in the code or only hinted at by in-game events, give the series a layer of depth that goes far beyond its colorful exterior. Some of these mechanics are strange by design, built to shape the way players interact with the games. Others are happy accidents, oddities that emerged from the limitations of programming and have since become legends. Whether intentional or not, they remind us that the Pokemon world is full of secrets, making every journey richer than it first appears. Unlike most rare occurrences in Pokemon, which are designed to make the player's journey more exciting or more challenging, this mechanic is invisible by default. Unless you happen to look at the summary screen of a creature that has it, you might never know it was there at all. And yet, for the trainers who stumble upon it, Pokérus is one of the rarest and most unusual discoveries in the entire series. Pokérus first appeared in the second-generation games, Gold and Silver, quietly introduced without fanfare. It is essentially a virus, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of weakening the infected Pokemon, it actually benefits them by doubling the amount of effort values, those hidden stat points gained from battling opponents that a Pokemon earns. For players who knew how to use it, Pokérus became one of the most valuable tools for training. But for the majority of players, it passed unnoticed, a ghostly mechanic hidden within the numbers of the game. What makes Pokérus so fascinating is its rarity. The odds of encountering it in the wild are staggeringly low, about 1 in 21,848. To put that in perspective, that is even rarer than encountering a shiny Pokemon in the same generation, which had odds of 1 in 8,192. The fact that something so beneficial could appear so rarely and with so little explanation baffled players for years. For some, the discovery of Pokérus felt like an accident, a strange symbol suddenly appearing on their Pokemon summary page without warning. When infected, a Pokemon will carry the virus for a few days of in-game time, during which it can spread to others in the player's party. After that, the infection ends, leaving the Pokemon immune but still retaining the benefits of doubled effort values permanently. This mechanic created a strange sense of urgency and strategy. Players who recognized what they had stumbled upon would rush to spread the virus to as many Pokemon as possible, carefully moving infected creatures into their party to ensure the rare phenomenon was preserved. The lore behind Pokérus is minimal, but its very existence created waves of speculation. Why would the developers include a virus in a game designed for children? Was it an accident, or was it deliberately hidden as a gift for the most observant trainers? Some fans theorized that it was inspired by real-world viruses that sometimes benefit their hosts, while others believed it was simply a clever way to make training more interesting for advanced players. Whatever the reasoning, it added a sense of mystery to the series, reinforcing the idea that Pokemon was deeper and more complex than it seemed. Community reaction to Pokérus has always been one of awe. For players who discovered it without knowing what it was, it felt like a secret treasure. Many went online to ask if their game was glitching, only to be told they had encountered one of the rarest mechanics in the franchise. Over time, Pokérus became a point of pride. Trainers who had it often kept infected Pokemon as carriers, passing it along to others whenever they started a new journey. Some even traded these carriers as gifts, spreading the rare virus far and wide as a symbol of generosity within the community. What sets Pokérus apart from almost every other mechanic in Pokemon is that it is purely beneficial. Most status conditions are designed to hinder progress paralysis, slows you down, poison saps health, burns reduce attack power, but Pokérus exists as a secret reward, an invisible boost for those lucky enough to encounter it. Its rarity ensures that most trainers will never see it naturally, and yet its effects can shape a team in ways that last throughout an entire adventure. For competitive players, it became an essential tool, providing a way to maximize stats efficiently. For casual players, it remained a curiosity, something they might hear about but never truly understand. In the grand scheme of Pokemon's strange mechanics, Pokérus is one of the most fascinating because of its combination of rarity, invisibility, and benefit. It is a reminder that the series is full of secrets, hidden layers waiting to be uncovered. To this day, players still share stories of the first time they encountered it, of how they had no idea what the strange symbol meant, and of the thrill of realizing they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. One of the strangest aspects of Pokemon has always been the hidden math that runs quietly beneath the surface. When you battle, it seems simple enough: deal damage, earn experience, level up, and your creature becomes stronger. But the truth is that growth in the Pokemon world is far from straightforward. Behind the experience, bars, and visible stats are two hidden systems: effort, values, and individual values that determine how every creature develops. They are never explained clearly in the main games, yet they have shaped battles, training methods, and even entire communities built around competitive play. Effort values, often called EVs, are invisible points that a Pokemon gains each time it defeats an opponent. These points are tied to the species it battles. For example, defeating a simple Pidgey adds points to speed, while a Magikarp contributes to the same stat in smaller amounts. Over time, these hidden points accumulate, and once enough are gained, they translate into higher stats as the Pokemon levels up. The system means that two Pokemon of the same species and level can end up with very different strengths simply because of what they have fought along the way. Individual values, or IVs, are an entirely different hidden mechanic. These are essentially genetic traits assigned at birth that determine a Pokemon's potential in each stat. While EVs can be influenced by the player through careful training, IVs are fixed from the moment a Pokemon is generated. One Pidgey might be naturally fast because of its IVs, while another might lean toward higher defenses. These values, ranging from 0 to 31 in modern games, are invisible without special tools, but they create subtle differences that determine which Pokemon will excel and which will always lag behind. Together, EVs and IVs create a hidden layer of depth that casual players often never notice. For years, many trainers assumed that leveling up alone determined a Pokemon's strength, only to realize later that the creatures they raised casually could never match the carefully trained teams of competitive players. This divide created an almost secret world within Pokemon, where advanced trainers learned to manipulate EVs through targeted battles and bred Pokemon repeatedly to obtain better IVs. It turned what seemed like a simple game into a discipline of numbers, patience, and hidden mechanics. The origins of these systems trace back to the very first generation, even if they were not well understood at the time. In Kanto, defeating opponents quietly adjusted hidden values in the background, leading to differences in how stats grew. Players often wondered why one Pokemon of the same level felt much stronger than another, without realizing the invisible math at work. It was not until fans began to study the code in detail that the full mechanics of EVs and IVs were revealed, opening the door to a deeper understanding of the games. Pokérus ties directly into this system, doubling the amount of EVs a Pokemon gains. For those lucky enough to encounter the rare virus, it became a tool for building stronger teams more efficiently. In this way, Pokérus is not just a curiosity, but a mechanic that interacts with one of the deepest systems in the series. Trainers who understood both elements could craft teams that maximized every advantage, turning hidden math into visible results. Lore and storytelling rarely touch on EVs and IVs, but their influence is undeniable. They shape the growth of every creature, determining not just how strong it becomes, but how unique it feels. Two Magikarps may look identical, but the hidden numbers inside ensure that one may grow into a slightly faster or more durable Gyarados than the other. This subtle variation reinforces the idea that no two Pokemon are truly alike, even within the same species. The competitive scene owes much of its existence to these hidden systems. Entire communities formed around breeding for perfect IVs, battling specific Pokemon to maximize EVs, and finding ways to combine the two for the strongest results. The introduction of items like the Power Bracer or the Destiny Knot in later generations gave trainers more control over these numbers, but the core concept remained the same. Power is not just about levels, but about invisible traits quietly shaping every battle. Casual players often discover EVs and IVs only when they notice that their Pokemon seem weaker than expected. The realization that hidden stats exist can be both frustrating and fascinating, opening the door to a world of min-maxing and optimization that turns a children's game into a complex strategy system. For some, this depth is overwhelming. For others, it is the very thing that keeps the series endlessly replayable. What makes EVs and IVs such a strange mechanic is that they were never meant to be obvious. They operate silently, influencing outcomes in ways most players never see. And yet, for those who seek them out, they become the foundation of entire strategies, shaping the way Pokemon are trained, bred, and battled. This duality, invisible to many, essential to others, makes them one of the most fascinating hidden systems in gaming. In the grand collection of Pokemon's unusual mechanics, EVs and IVs stand out as the secret heartbeat of the series. They remind us that even when two creatures look the same, their journeys and their potential can be entirely different. For trainers who dive deep, they are the numbers behind the magic, the invisible hands shaping every battle. And for those who never notice, they remain a quiet mystery, one of the many strange secrets hiding beneath the surface of the Pokemon world. Few mechanics in Pokemon history have inspired as much fascination, frustration, and obsession as shiny Pokemon. These rare, alternate-colored versions were first introduced in the second generation as a way to highlight differences in creatures, and ever since, they have grown into a cultural phenomenon. On the surface, the mechanic seems simple. Encounter a Pokemon, and once in a great while, it may sparkle with a different hue. But hidden behind this simplicity are numbers, restrictions, and locks that make shiny hunting one of the strangest systems in the entire franchise. In the earliest days, shiny odds were set at 1 in 8,192. This meant that out of thousands of encounters, only a tiny handful would ever sparkle. For most players, the chance of finding one was so low that it seemed impossible, and yet, when one finally appeared, it created a moment of awe unlike anything else in gaming. The introduction of shinies turned ordinary creatures into once-in-a-lifetime experiences, transforming encounters that might have otherwise been ignored into treasured memories. One of the most famous examples came in the form of the red Gyarados found in the Lake of Rage in Johto. This was the very first shiny that most players ever saw, and it was deliberately placed by the developers to ensure that everyone understood what shinies were. Unlike random encounters, this one was guaranteed, serving as a teaching tool and a showcase of the new mechanic. For many, it remains the most iconic shiny in the entire series, proof that rarity could be designed into the adventure itself. Beyond that scripted moment, however, the odds were merciless. Shiny encounters were entirely random, meaning that even the most patient trainer could spend weeks searching without success. Some players told stories of finding a shiny in their very first encounter, while others played entire games without seeing a single one. This randomness became part of the legend, a reminder that luck plays as much a role in the Pokemon world as skill. Over time, the odds of encountering shinies were reduced to make them more accessible. By the 6th generation, the base odds had been lowered to 1 in 4,096, and special methods like chaining, breeding, and items such as the shiny charm made the process more manageable. Despite these changes, the cultural weight of shinies remained the same. Even at lower odds, the sight of sparkles still felt miraculous, as though the game had rewarded patience with a small but unforgettable gift. What makes the system truly strange, though, is the concept of shiny locks. In certain games, specific Pokemon are coded so that they can never appear shiny, no matter how many times a trainer resets. These locks are most commonly placed on mythicals and story-related legendaries, such as Mew or Celebi, to preserve the consistency of the narrative or to control distribution. For players unaware of these restrictions, this has led to countless hours of wasted effort, with hunters resetting endlessly for a shiny that would never appear. The very existence of shiny locks adds an almost cruel layer of mystery to the mechanic, turning what seems like a universal possibility into something carefully limited. The lore around shinies is minimal in the official games, but fans have always speculated about their meaning. Some view them as genetic mutations, rare variations within a species. Others imagine them as special blessings, hints that a particular Pokemon has a unique destiny. Whatever the explanation, shinies hold a cultural significance that far outweighs their statistical rarity. They are trophies, symbols of dedication, and in some cases, cultural legends passed down through stories of miraculous encounters. The community has embraced shiny hunting as one of the most popular challenges in the franchise. Entire online groups are dedicated to sharing stories, celebrating catches, and comparing methods. For some, shiny hunting has become the core of the Pokemon experience, a way to stretch the game's content and create personal stories of triumph over improbability. For others, the fascination lies in the thrill of the unexpected, the moment when a routine encounter suddenly turns extraordinary. The strangeness of shiny mechanics lies not only in their odds, but in their deliberate restrictions. The developers designed them to be rare enough to feel special, but not so rare that they were impossible. At the same time, shiny locks ensured that some creatures would always remain unobtainable, turning them into cultural talking points for years. This balance of possibility and impossibility, of luck and design, has made shinies one of the most unique mechanics in gaming. In the grand story of Pokemon's hidden systems, shiny Pokemon represent the perfect mix of chance, rarity, and mystery. They are the sparkles that turn ordinary battles into legends, the prizes that hunters dedicate thousands of hours to pursue. And whether encountered by luck or by persistence, they stand as reminders that beneath the familiar surface of Pokemon lies a world of strange and wonderful mechanics waiting to be uncovered. One of the most unusual hidden systems in Pokemon is the concept of friendship, sometimes called happiness. Unlike levels, moves, or experience, this value is invisible, tracked quietly in the background as a number that rises and falls based on how a trainer treats their Pokemon. What makes it especially strange is how deeply it affects evolutions. Certain creatures will never reach their final form unless this unseen bond is nurtured, making friendship one of the most personal and mysterious mechanics in the series. The system was introduced in the Johto games, a fitting choice given that regions focus on bonds between trainers and Pokemon. In those early days, only a handful of creatures evolved this way, but they were memorable enough to leave a lasting impression. For example, Eevee, famous for its branching evolutionary lines, could only become Espeon or Umbreon if its hidden happiness value was high enough, with the time of day further determining which form would emerge. For many players, discovering this was baffling. They would level Eevee over and over, only to wonder why it never evolved until invisible thresholds were met. Togepi was another early example, gifted to players in the Johto storyline as a symbol of trust and new beginnings. Unlike other Pokemon that evolved through training or items, Togepi's transformation into Togetic required the trainer to care for it patiently. This was one of the first times the games explicitly tied growth to a bond rather than to battle alone, a mechanic that felt both rewarding and perplexing. Without guides, players often had no idea why their Togepi suddenly evolved one day, making it one of the most surprising discoveries in the series. Friendship as a mechanic has always been hidden, but the ways to influence it are surprisingly varied. Walking with a Pokemon in the party increases the bond over time, as does leveling it up, using items like vitamins, or even getting massages in certain games. On the other hand, fainting in battle or using bitter herbal medicine lowers the value. These details were rarely explained in the games themselves, leading players to experiment and form their own theories. Some thought simply keeping a Pokemon in the party forever would do the trick, while others discovered the small boosts tied to everyday actions. One of the strangest quirks of the system is how it has evolved over the generations. In the earlier games, friendship was extremely opaque, with only vague NPC hints about how a Pokemon felt toward its trainer. Later titles introduced features like the Soothe Bell to accelerate the process, as well as friendship checkers that gave clearer feedback. Despite these improvements, the mechanic has always retained an air of mystery, since the exact numerical value remains hidden from the player's eyes. Golbat is another memorable case. In the Johto games, many players who had trained the bat-like Pokemon to high levels were shocked when it evolved into Crobat, something they had never expected. This evolution was a clear reward for trainers who had stuck with a Pokemon often seen as weak and annoying, turning loyalty into strength. It was a clever way for the developers to encourage patience, making Crobat a symbol of how hidden bonds could transform an underappreciated partner into a powerful ally. The lore surrounding friendship-based evolution ties neatly into themes of care and trust. Creatures that require strong bonds to evolve often represent companionship, loyalty, or emotional growth. Eevee's transformations into Espeon and Umbreon symbolize trust tied to time, reflecting the passage of day and night. Togepi's evolution mirrors the idea of nurturing innocence into maturity, Crobat embodies the reward for dedication, turning persistence into payoff. Together, these evolutions reinforce the message that Pokemon is not just about battles, but about relationships. In competitive play, friendship also sneaks into moves. Attacks like Return grow stronger the more a Pokemon trusts its trainer, while frustration does the opposite, punishing loyalty with powerlessness and rewarding neglect. This strange dichotomy makes friendship a mechanic that goes beyond evolution, shaping strategies in ways that many players overlook. While Return has often been a reliable move for those who keep their Pokemon happy, frustration has seen niche use in specific strategies where trainers deliberately keep their bonds low. Community reactions to friendship mechanics have always been mixed. Some players find it heartwarming that care and patience are rewarded in the games, while others see it as an arbitrary barrier that complicates evolution. Yet its presence has made Pokemon feel more personal, encouraging trainers to think about their bonds with their teams in ways that numbers and levels cannot capture. Even when players complain about the hidden nature of the system, they still recognize the charm of seeing a beloved partner evolve thanks to their shared journey. What makes friendship so unusual compared to other mechanics is how invisible and emotional it feels. Unlike EVs, IVs, or shiny odds, which can be reduced to math and probability, friendship carries an almost narrative quality. It is not about grinding battles endlessly, but about sharing time and experiences, even if those details are tracked only in code. The hidden nature of the system makes it feel mysterious, and the surprise of a sudden evolution gives it an almost magical quality. In the grand collection of Pokemon's hidden systems, friendship remains one of the most personal. It is a reminder that the games are not just about strength or rarity, but about the bonds between trainer and Pokemon. By tying evolutions and moves to an invisible value, the developers created a mechanic that rewards care as much as combat, making it one of the strangest and most memorable systems in the series. Another of Pokemon's strangest hidden mechanics lies in how creatures behave in battle and how their stats grow shaped not only by training and invisible numbers, but also by natures and abilities. These systems, introduced in different generations, have completely changed the way players understand their teams. On the surface, a Pokemon may look the same as any other of its species, but hidden behind the stats screen are traits that can determine whether it thrives or struggles in combat. For many players, these mechanics are confusing or frustrating, but for others, they are the core of what makes Pokemon endlessly replayable. Natures were first introduced in the third generation as a way to individualize growth even further. Every Pokemon has a nature that subtly affects its stats. Some natures raise one stat while lowering another, like Adamant, which boosts attack but weakens special attack. Others do not affect stats at all, serving only as flavor. What makes this mechanic unusual is that it is both simple and deeply complex. A casual player might see the word gentle or brave and think it is just personality text, but in reality, these words shape the future of the Pokemon's performance. For competitive players, natures became one of the most important details to consider when raising a team. The Ralts line offers a famous example. A player who wants a Gardevoir focused on special attack benefits greatly from a nature like Modest, while an Adamant nature would weaken its effectiveness. Without knowledge of the mechanic, a player might raise a Gardevoir that never performs as expected simply because its nature pushes it in the wrong direction. This hidden influence has frustrated many casual players, but has also fascinated those who enjoy min-maxing their teams. The fact that a single word could so heavily alter growth is one of the strangest quirks in Pokemon's design. Abilities introduced in the same generation added yet another invisible layer. Every Pokemon has an ability that affects how it performs in battle, sometimes in ways that dramatically alter its role. For example, Slocking is infamous for having stats that rival legendaries, but its ability, Truant, forces it to loaf around every other turn. This one restriction prevents it from dominating the game entirely, turning what could have been an overpowered powerhouse into a balanced yet quirky oddity. For trainers unaware of abilities, Slocking seems unbeatable until they notice its strange tendency to pause mid-battle. Some abilities are subtle, offering small boosts to certain moves or stats. Others are dramatic, like Levitate, which allows certain Pokemon to completely ignore ground-type attacks. The existence of these abilities has shaped not only how Pokemon are used, but also how strategies are formed. Trainers began planning teams around abilities, using them to counter weaknesses or create unexpected synergies. For players who enjoy discovery, abilities became one of the most fascinating aspects of the games, as each new generation introduced fresh mechanics that could completely change how a familiar Pokemon functioned. The strangeness of these systems lies in how they are both essential and invisible. A nature is assigned at birth and cannot be changed in earlier games, meaning that luck plays a huge role in determining a Pokemon's long-term usefulness. Abilities are tied to species, sometimes with multiple possibilities, making it even more unpredictable what kind of creature a trainer might catch. For casual players, these mechanics may seem like needless complexity, but for those who dive deep, they are the hidden backbone of competitive play, adding layers of strategy that keep the game fresh even decades later. Later generations have made these systems more accessible. Items like mints allow players to change a Pokemon's effective nature, while abilities can sometimes be altered with capsules. These updates reflect how important the mechanics became, ensuring that players who want to optimize their teams are not trapped by bad luck. Yet, even with these tools, the systems remain strange in how much they dictate outcomes without being obvious. Two Pokemon of the same species can perform radically differently simply because one has the right nature or ability. Lore and storytelling rarely acknowledge these systems, but their presence makes the world feel more realistic. Just as no two creatures in nature are exactly alike, no two Pokemon grow in the same way. Some are naturally more defensive, others more aggressive, and some carry quirks that make them unique. By embedding these differences in hidden mechanics, the developers created a world where individuality matters, even if it is invisible to the average player. The community has embraced these systems with equal parts frustration and fascination. Some players love the depth they bring, turning Pokemon into a game of endless strategy and personalization. Others feel overwhelmed, arguing that the hidden math takes away from the simplicity that made the series popular in the first place. Yet even critics acknowledge the uniqueness of these mechanics, which have set Pokemon apart from other RPGs by ensuring that no two creatures are truly identical. In the grand tapestry of Pokemon's hidden mechanics, natures and abilities stand as a reminder of how much depth lies beneath the surface. They are systems that can frustrate casual players, empower competitive trainers, and spark endless discussions about the value of individuality in a digital world. Strange, invisible, and deeply influential, they shape every battle in ways most players never realize, proof that Pokemon's mysteries are not always found in its legends, but in the hidden numbers quietly shaping every fight. When breeding was first introduced in the Johto generation, it seemed like a simple addition. Leave two compatible Pokemon at the daycare, walk a certain number of steps, and eventually an egg would appear. From this egg, a new Pokemon would hatch, carrying on the legacy of its parents. But as with so many other mechanics, hidden rules and strange quirks turned breeding into one of the deepest systems in the entire franchise. What began as a straightforward way to obtain baby Pokemon soon became a cornerstone of competitive play, shiny hunting, and strategies that players continue to explore decades later. At the heart of breeding is the idea of inheritance. From the very beginning, certain traits could be passed down from parent to offspring. Moves are perhaps the most well-known example. If a parent Pokemon knows a move that the baby would not normally learn through leveling up, there is a chance it can be passed down. This led to the concept of egg moves, rare abilities that gave the offspring unique advantages. For instance, breeding a Togepi with certain parents could result in it learning moves it would never normally acquire, surprising players who experimented with combinations. These discoveries gave breeding a sense of experimentation, as though trainers were uncovering secrets hidden within the code itself. Beyond moves, other traits also transferred in mysterious ways. The species of the baby is almost always determined by the female, unless Ditto is involved. This made Ditto one of the most valuable creatures in the entire breeding system, since its ability to pair with nearly any Pokemon turned it into the ultimate partner for producing offspring. Trainers who caught or traded for a Ditto from another region often treasured it even more, since regional origins eventually became tied to shiny hunting. One of the strangest quirks of breeding comes in the form of individual values, or IVs. From the third generation onward, offspring could inherit certain IVs from their parents, making breeding an essential part of competitive play. At first, the process was unpredictable and tedious. Players would hatch dozens, even hundreds of eggs in hopes of finding one with the right spread of IVs. Later generations introduced items like the Destiny Knot to streamline this, but in the early days, breeding for perfect IVs was an exercise in patience that bordered on obsession. The Masuda method, introduced in the fourth generation, added another layer of strangeness to breeding. Named after Game Freak director Junichi Masuda, this mechanic increases the odds of hatching a shiny Pokemon if the two parents come from games of different languages. While the base odds of encountering a shiny remained 1 in 8,192 at the time, using the Masuda method drastically improved the chances. For many shiny hunters, this became the most reliable way to obtain alternate colored Pokemon, transforming breeding into a long-term challenge filled with both frustration and joy. The discovery of the Masuda method was itself a moment of mystery. Players noticed through trial and error that their odds of finding shinies seemed higher when using international pairs. Over time, careful experimentation confirmed the hidden mechanic, and it eventually became an acknowledged feature of the series. Today, the Masuda method remains one of the most popular shiny hunting techniques, turning the act of hatching eggs into a global strategy that unites trainers across regions. Another strange quirk of breeding lies in how certain items affect inheritance. Items like Everstone ensure that a parent's nature is passed down, while the previously mentioned Destiny Knot guarantees that more IVs transfer. These tools gave players increasing control over the process, transforming breeding from random chance into something closer to science. Still, the sheer number of factors involved, from moves to stats to hidden abilities, means that breeding remains one of the most complex mechanics in Pokemon, full of hidden rules that even experienced players sometimes overlook. Lore rarely touches directly on breeding, but the existence of eggs has always fascinated fans. Professor Elm in Johto was the first to study them, tying the mechanic into the region's themes of discovery and growth. The idea that every Pokemon comes from an egg, even ones as unusual as legendaries in lore, has sparked endless debates among players. Some see it as a simple gameplay convenience, while others imagine it as a deeper reflection of the Pokemon world's mysteries. The fact that Ditto can pair with nearly anything has also raised questions, adding to the odd charm of this mechanic. The community's relationship with breeding has been one of dedication and perseverance. Stories of players hatching thousands of eggs in search of a shiny are common, as are tales of miraculous luck when one hatches within just a few tries. For many, the act of cycling endlessly to produce eggs and hatch them has become a meditative routine, turning a strange and tedious system into a calming ritual. The rewards, rare shinies, perfect IVs, or unique movesets make the effort worthwhile, transforming breeding into a cornerstone of the franchise. In the grand collection of Pokemon's hidden systems, breeding is one of the strangest because it combines randomness with control. Trainers can influence the outcome, but never fully predict it, creating a cycle of hope, frustration, and triumph. From egg moves to IV inheritance to the Masuda method, every detail reflects the balance of chance and design that makes Pokemon so endlessly captivating. It is a mechanic that feels both scientific and mysterious, a reminder that even in a world of coded rules, there is always room for surprise. Among the strangest mechanics ever introduced in the Pokemon series are the fusion systems tied to certain legendaries. Unlike evolutions, alternate forms, or even mega transformations, fusion involves combining two separate Pokemon into a single being, creating something that is both familiar and entirely new. This mechanic is rare, only appearing with a handful of legendary figures, but it has fascinated players since the moment it was introduced. The very idea of blending creatures together feels unusual in a world built on individuality, yet it has become a defining quirk of the modern games. The first example came with Kyurem in the 5th generation. On its own, this icy dragon was already a legendary, embodying incompleteness and emptiness, the shell left behind after Reshiram and Zekrom split from a single being in the lore of Unova. But when given special items, known as the DNA splicers, Kyurem could fuse with either Reshiram or Zekrom, creating new forms that blended the strengths of both. Kyurem fused with Reshiram became White Kyurem, wielding fiery power, while Kyurem fused with Zekrom became Black Kyurem, embodying electricity and ice. This mechanic was unlike anything seen before, allowing a single Pokemon to take on the essence of another while retaining its own identity. The mechanics behind the fusion were unusual. Using the DNA splicers, players could literally combine two separate legendaries into one, but doing so removed the second Pokemon from their party, essentially merging it into Kyurem's body. To reverse the process, the items could be used again, splitting them back into their original forms. This raised fascinating questions about the nature of Pokemon themselves. Were they truly individual beings, or could they be merged and separated at will through human technology? The unsettling strangeness of the mechanic only added to Kyurem's mythological role as a creature defined by incompleteness. Fusion returned in the 7th generation with Necrozma. This legendary, tied to light and darkness, could use items called the N-Solarizer and N-Lunarizer to fuse with either Solgaleo or Lunala. When combined with Solgaleo, it became Duskmane Necrozma, and when merged with Lunala, it became Dawnwings Necrozma. These forms represented Necrozma consuming the light of the other legendaries, reinforcing its lore as a parasite that steals radiance from others. Unlike Kyurem's fusions, which symbolized balance and incompleteness, Necrozma's forms felt more sinister. Mechanically, the process worked much the same way as Kyurem's. Fusion required specific items and temporarily removed the second legendary from the party. For players, this meant making strategic decisions about which form to keep, since each fusion created entirely different strengths and movesets. In competitive battles, fused forms often became dominant forces, their stats and abilities combining to create overwhelming power. Yet despite this utility, the strangeness of the mechanic remained. The idea of merging creatures together, stripping one of its individuality to empower another, felt unsettling in a world otherwise built on companionship. What makes fusion such a curious mechanic is how rarely it appears. In a franchise with over 1,000 creatures, only a select few have ever been given this ability. It is not treated as a normal evolution or transformation, but as something special, tied directly to the myths of the regions where it appears. In Unova, it reflected the fractured history of truth and ideals, with Kyurem as the incomplete remnant. In Alola, it tied to themes of light and consumption, with Necrozma embodying hunger and parasitism. These thematic links ensure that fusion feels more than just a gimmick. It feels like a deliberate narrative tool. The community has always been fascinated by these fusions. Players debated the ethical implications of combining Pokemon, joking about what it meant for the individuality of Reshiram, Zekrom, Solgaleo, or Lunala when they were absorbed. Others speculated about what other fusions might one day appear. Could other legendaries combine in similar ways? What would happen if two unrelated creatures were fused together? Fan art and theories expanded on these questions, creating an entire subculture around the mechanic. In competitive play, fusion forms have left lasting marks. Black Kyurem and White Kyurem became forces in their generation, while Duskmane and Dawnwings Necrozma dominated in formats where they were allowed. Their presence demonstrated how fusion could completely redefine a Pokemon's role, taking traits from two beings and merging them into a single powerhouse. This made them not only narratively strange but also mechanically significant, reshaping the competitive landscape whenever they appeared. From a lore perspective, fusion remains one of the most unusual ideas in Pokemon history. It suggests that creatures are not entirely separate entities, but that their essences can be combined, altered, and consumed. In Kyurem's case, it symbolized loss and incompleteness. In Necrozma's case, it symbolized hunger and domination. For players, this added a layer of unsettling mystery to legendaries already steeped in myth, reinforcing the idea that these beings exist beyond the normal rules of the Pokemon world. In the grand collection of strange mechanics, fusion stands out as one of the most fascinating. It is rare, powerful, and thematically rich, blending gameplay with lore in ways few other systems do. It challenges the idea of individuality, raises questions about the nature of Pokemon, and creates some of the most striking forms in the series. Whether admired for their design, feared for their power, or debated for their implications, fused Pokemon remain among the strangest creations the series has ever produced. Few Pokemon embody strangeness in both design and mechanics quite like Rotom. On the surface, it appears to be a small, mischievous, ghostly creature with an electric typing, floating around like a spark of energy. But what sets it apart from nearly every other Pokemon is its ability to inhabit appliances, changing both its form and its typing in the process. This mechanic, first introduced in the fourth generation, turned Rotom into a symbol of experimentation within the franchise, blending gameplay with humor, lore, and a sense of unpredictability. Rotom's basic form is already unusual. It is classified as a plasma Pokemon, suggesting that it is made of energy rather than flesh and bone. Its ability to slip into electronic devices ties it to technology in a way few other creatures are, making it feel more like a spirit of the digital age than a traditional monster. When players first discovered that it could inhabit household appliances, the revelation was as strange as it was entertaining. Suddenly, a seemingly minor ghost-type Pokemon became one of the most versatile creatures in the game. The forms themselves reflect everyday technology. By inhabiting a microwave, Rotom becomes a fire type. A refrigerator gives it ice powers, a washing machine turns it into water, a fan grants it flying, and a lawnmower provides grass typing. Each transformation not only changes Rotom's type, but also gives it a unique signature move tied to the appliance, such as Hydro Pump for the washing machine form or Blizzard for the refrigerator form. This mechanic turned Rotom into a toolbox of sorts, capable of adapting to multiple situations with surprising effectiveness. What made these forms especially strange was how they were accessed in the early games. In Platinum, Rotom could be found in the Old Chateau, a haunted mansion already filled with eerie lore. But to access its alternate forms, players had to venture into a secret room in Professor Rowan's laboratory, where a set of appliances mysteriously waited. Interacting with them allowed Rotom to jump into the machines and change its form, blending supernatural themes with everyday household items. The juxtaposition was bizarre, almost comical, and yet it quickly became one of the most beloved quirks in the series. Later generations streamlined the process, making it easier to swap Rotom's forms. In the Alola region, the idea went even further, as Rotom was integrated into the player's Pokédex itself, essentially becoming a companion that spoke to the trainer throughout their journey. This narrative twist blurred the line between gameplay mechanic and character, transforming Rotom from a quirky side Pokemon into a central figure of the adventure. Its ability to merge with technology became more than just a battle mechanic. It was woven into the very structure of the game. Competitive play gave Rotom's forms new significance. Certain versions, like Rotom Wash, became staples of high-level battles thanks to their strong typing and versatile move pools. Others, like Rotom Heat, carved out niche roles that made them valuable counters to specific threats. The fact that a single Pokemon could adapt to so many different roles depending on its form made it one of the most flexible options in competitive play, further cementing its reputation as a strange but powerful addition to any team. From a lore perspective, Rotom represents the intersection of the natural and the technological. It is a ghostly being that inhabits man-made machines, raising questions about the relationship between Pokemon and human creations. Unlike most creatures, which embody natural elements like fire, water, or plants, Rotom feels more artificial, as though it emerged alongside humanity's inventions. This theme of coexistence with technology has become more relevant with each generation, making Rotom one of the most modern-feeling Pokemon in the franchise. The community has embraced Rotom's strangeness wholeheartedly. Its forms are often the subject of jokes, memes, and fan art, with players imagining it inhabiting everything from smartphones to cars. Its role in Alola as the Rotom Dex added to its charm, giving it personality and dialogue that made it feel more alive than ever. Despite its odd premise, or perhaps because of it, Rotom has become a fan favorite, celebrated for its versatility and uniqueness. What makes Rotom's form mechanic so fascinating is how it combines humor, gameplay depth, and narrative significance. It is rare for a single Pokemon to touch on all these aspects, but Rotom manages to do so seamlessly. Its ability to inhabit appliances is both strange and practical, offering new strategies in battle while also serving as a light-hearted quirk that sets it apart. In the grand list of strange Pokemon mechanics, Rotom's forms are among the most creative. They remind players that the franchise is not afraid to experiment, to blend the supernatural with the mundane, and to create creatures that feel entirely unlike anything else. Rotom is more than just a quirky ghost. It is a symbol of the unexpected, proof that even the strangest ideas can become beloved parts of the Pokemon world. Another strange but fascinating system within the Pokemon series is the idea of alternate forms, variations of the same species that change appearance, typing, or abilities depending on conditions. Unlike evolutions, which represent permanent growth, these forms are often temporary or tied to unique circumstances. They highlight how fluid identity can be within the Pokemon world, and they create some of the most unusual mechanics players have ever encountered. One of the earliest examples was Cast Form, introduced in the third generation. On its own, Cast Form appears as a small, cloud-like figure with a neutral typing, but its true quirk lies in its ability to change form depending on the weather. Sunny conditions turn it into a fiery orb, rain reshapes it into a droplet of water, and hail transforms it into a snowflake-like form. Each transformation alters not only its appearance, but also its typing, making it an embodiment of environmental change. For players who discovered Cast Form mid-battle, the sudden transformations were both confusing and mesmerizing, a reminder that even the weather itself could alter a Pokemon's identity. Deoxys, introduced in the same generation, represents another unusual take on forms. Rather than being tied to weather, Deoxys changes depending on which mode it is in: attack, defense, speed, or normal. Each form drastically alters its stats, turning Deoxys into one of the most versatile Pokemon in the franchise. What makes this especially strange is that the form cannot be switched mid-battle in most games. Instead, it depends on interacting with special meteorites found in certain locations. This mechanic tied Deoxys to cosmic themes, reinforcing its lore as a DNA-based alien life form, but it also created one of the oddest examples of form changes in the series. Players had to seek out the meteorites just to alter how their legendary functioned, turning the act of form switching into a ritual of sorts. Vivillon, from the 6th generation, presented a more subtle but equally unusual mechanic. Unlike Cast Form or Deoxys, Vivillon does not change form dynamically. Instead, its wing patterns vary depending on the geographic location of the player's real-world game. Trainers in one part of the world might hatch Vivillon with a polar pattern, while others might see tropical or meadow designs. This mechanic turned Vivillon into a symbol of global community, encouraging players to trade internationally to collect every pattern. For many, it was the first time Pokemon truly reflected real-world diversity, with the creature's appearance shaped by where the player lived. It was both strange and brilliant, a mechanic that blurred the line between in-game identity and real-world geography. Then there is Unknown, perhaps the strangest example of forms in the series. This mysterious Pokemon, tied to ancient ruins and cryptic messages, has 28 variations, one for each letter of the alphabet, plus question mark and exclamation point. On the surface, Unknown's gimmick seems simple: collect them all, but the lore surrounding them hints at deeper mysteries. They are said to communicate with one another through their shapes, and in the third Pokemon movie, they were portrayed as beings capable of altering reality itself. The idea that these seemingly weak creatures hide cosmic power made their multiple forms feel even more unsettling, turning what could have been a simple gimmick into one of the strangest mechanics in Pokemon. The variety of alternate forms across the series highlights how diverse the concept can be. Some, like cast form, are tied to dynamic changes in battle. Others, like Deoxys, depend on special interactions outside of battle. Vivillon reflects the player's real-world location, while Unknown ties directly into myth and mystery. Each approach shows a different angle on the idea of identity, raising questions about what it means for Pokemon to be defined by their circumstances. From a competitive standpoint, forms create unique challenges. A cast form might look harmless, but can suddenly switch typing mid-battle. Deoxys, in its attack form, is a glass cannon, while in defense form, it becomes a wall. Vivillon, despite its cosmetic changes, became notable for its access to moves like Sleep Powder and Quiver Dance, while Unknown, despite its many forms, remained almost entirely useless in battle. The inconsistency of forms makes them unpredictable, reinforcing their strangeness as mechanics. The community has always been fascinated by these variations. Collectors often dedicate themselves to gathering every Vivillon pattern or every unknown letter, while competitive players experiment with how Deoxys's different forms can fit into their strategies. Cast form remains beloved for its quirky transformations, even if it is not strong competitively, and Unknown continues to inspire theories about its hidden lore. Each form system has added layers of mystery and creativity, reminding players that Pokemon is not just about numbers and battles, but about identity and possibility. In the grand ranking of strange mechanics, alternate forms stand out because they challenge the idea that species are static. They show that appearance, typing, and even stats can shift depending on conditions, environment, or lore. These variations enrich the world, making it feel alive and unpredictable. Whether through weather, cosmic power, geography, or ancient mystery, alternate forms remain some of the most unusual and fascinating mechanics in Pokemon history. Among the most unusual mechanics in Pokemon are the moves themselves. On the surface, attacks seem straightforward: select a move, deal damage, and lower the opponent's health. But hidden within the system are a handful of moves that behave in ways entirely unlike the rest, breaking expectations and sometimes bending the rules of the game itself. These oddities show just how experimental the series has always been, turning battles into more than just a contest of strength. One of the strangest moves is Struggle. Unlike most attacks, Struggle cannot be chosen from a menu and cannot be learned naturally. It only appears when a Pokemon has run out of usable moves, either because its power points have all been depleted or because it has no moves that can affect the opponent. Struggle deals a small amount of damage, but also causes the user to take recoil, making it a desperate last resort. The oddity of Struggle lies in its universality. Every Pokemon can use it, regardless of species or typing, even those that normally cannot attack at all. It represents a kind of fail-safe coded into the game, ensuring that a battle never reaches a complete stalemate. Its existence is rarely noticed, but for those who encounter it, Struggle becomes a strange reminder that even in Pokemon, desperation is accounted for. Transform is another curious move, famously associated with Ditto and also used by Mew. When activated, it copies the opponent entirely, from typing to moveset, leaving behind only the original creature's hit points. This mechanic is fascinating because it effectively erases the user's identity for the duration of the battle, turning them into a reflection of their opponent. Ditto in particular has become synonymous with this mechanic, serving as both a curiosity in casual play and a powerful tool in breeding thanks to its ability to pair with nearly any species. Transform raises unusual questions about individuality in the Pokemon world. Is Ditto truly its own being or merely a mirror of others? The move embodies that strangeness perfectly, making it one of the most philosophically unusual mechanics in the series. Sketch, the signature move of Smeargle, adds another layer of oddity. Unlike Transform, which copies moves temporarily, Sketch permanently copies the target's last move, replacing itself in the user's moveset. This means that Smeargle can, in theory, learn almost any move in the game, giving it an unmatched versatility. The downside is that it is incredibly fragile, making it more of a novelty than a powerhouse in battle. Still, the existence of Sketch as a move creates endless possibilities, allowing for bizarre and creative strategies that no other Pokemon can achieve. Competitive players have often experimented with Smeargle's potential, turning it into a kind of blank canvas for unusual tactics. There are also moves that defy traditional damage systems. Metronome, another iconic oddity, randomly selects any move in the game, creating moments of pure chaos. A Jigglypuff, using Metronome, might summon a legendary's signature attack, or something as harmless as Splash. This randomness has made Metronome both beloved and frustrating, embodying the unpredictability that defines so many of Pokemon's strangest mechanics. While not tied to a single species like Transform or Sketch, it has become a cultural icon of its own, symbolizing the joy of uncertainty. Struggle, Transform, Sketch, and Metronome are only the beginning. Many other moves carry strange quirks that break the mold. Destiny Bond ties a fainted opponent to the user, ensuring that both fall together. Counter and Mirror Coat reflect damage in unusual ways, reversing the rules of offense and defense. Even Splash, the infamous move associated with Magikarp, is an oddity, as it literally does nothing, existing only as a joke within the code. Each of these moves adds layers of unpredictability to the battle system, showing that not every mechanic is meant to be practical. Some are simply there to surprise and entertain. The lore surrounding these moves often enhances their oddness. Ditto's Transform reflects its mysterious biology, suggesting a creature with no fixed identity. Smeargle's Sketch ties into its artistic theme, painting moves onto its blank canvas. Struggle feels like a reflection of endurance, a last-ditch effort, even when all hope is gone. And Splash, despite its uselessness, hints at cultural humor, a kind of in-joke shared between developers and players. These quirks give the moves more personality than one might expect, reinforcing the idea that even in a game defined by numbers, creativity and humor still shine through. From a competitive standpoint, these moves have had varying impacts. Struggle is rarely seen except in obscure scenarios, but Transform has given Ditto surprising utility, especially when used with items like the Choice Scarf to outspeed and copy powerful opponents. Sketch has made Smeargle a wild card, capable of crafting strategies impossible for any other Pokemon. Metronome, while not competitive, remains beloved for casual play, with entire communities built around the fun of watching its random results. These moves may not always be practical, but they embody the experimentation that has kept the series fresh for so long. The community's reaction to these oddities has always been one of fascination. Players swap stories of unexpected metronome results, bizarre sketch strategies, or strange encounters with struggle. Fan art and memes celebrate Magikarp's uselessness, turning Splash into one of the most iconic non-moves in gaming history. These reactions show how much charm lies in Pokemon's quirks, and how even the strangest mechanics can capture the imagination of players worldwide. In the grand catalog of strange Pokemon systems, oddball moves stand as proof that not everything is designed for efficiency. Some exist to surprise, some to challenge assumptions, and others simply to add humor. They are reminders that the Pokemon world is not just about battles and victories, but about creativity, unpredictability, and fun. Whether through desperation, imitation, chaos, or sheer uselessness, these moves remain among the most unusual mechanics in the franchise. Evolution has always been one of the most iconic aspects of Pokemon, but some of its methods stand out as particularly strange. Most evolutions are straightforward. A creature levels up, learns a move, or uses a common stone. But hidden among the standard processes are mechanics tied to held items, trades, and obscure triggers that have baffled players for years. These quirks reflect the developer's willingness to experiment with evolution, creating methods that feel unusual and sometimes even counterintuitive. In the earliest games, trade evolutions were already mysterious. Many trainers discovered that trading certain Pokemon caused them to evolve, often without any clear explanation. This mechanic emphasized the social aspect of the games, encouraging players to connect with one another. But as the series grew, the developers began layering new requirements on top of trades, making some evolutions dependent on items that had to be held during the exchange. One of the first and most memorable examples is Scyther. On its own, Scyther is a swift, insect-like fighter with razor-sharp blades. But to evolve into Scizor, it must hold a metal coat while being traded. The addition of this steel-infused item makes sense thematically, as the creature's body becomes armored in gleaming red metal, but the process itself is strange. Without knowledge of the hidden requirement, many players found themselves stuck with Scyther, unaware that the evolution even existed. The same item also affects Onyx, transforming the rock snake into Steelix when traded with a metal coat. This connection between item and evolution gave the games a sense of mystery, but also created confusion for anyone not reading guides or playing with friends who knew the secret. Another peculiar case comes from Slowpoke. By itself, it is famous for its dopey appearance and lazy demeanor. But with a King's Rock held during a trade, it evolves into Slowking, gaining wisdom and psychic power. Thematically, the idea works. The crown-like item transforms Slowpoke into a more regal figure. But the King's Rock also enables Poliwhirl to evolve into Politoed, giving the item two different evolutionary uses. For players experimenting with items, this dual function made the King's Rock one of the strangest mechanics in the series, since it was tied not only to power-ups, but to entirely new species. These item-based evolutions raised questions about how much sense the process made within the lore. Why would simply holding an object during a trade completely alter a Pokemon's biology? Was it the item's influence, the stress of the trade itself, or some combination of both? The games never explained these details, leaving players to speculate. This vagueness only heightened the strangeness of the mechanic, turning each item-based evolution into a puzzle of its own. Over time, more items were introduced that worked in similarly odd ways. Some, like the Protector for Rhydon or the Electorizer for Electabuzz, were tied to evolutions that expanded old species in later generations. Others, like the Magmarizer for Magmar, reinforced the idea that held items were becoming a staple of evolution design. Each new item added complexity, and with it, a growing sense of strangeness. Trainers who wanted to complete their Pokédex had to hunt down these rare objects, often hidden deep in caves or available only once per playthrough. Beyond held items, evolutionary stones themselves introduced odd quirks. While fire, water, and thunder stones were fairly straightforward, other stones created surprises. The Moonstone, for example, transformed creatures like Jigglypuff and Clefairy, tying them to themes of celestial magic. Later generations expanded the concept even further with items like the Dawnstone, Duskstone, and Shiny Stone, each introducing new methods of evolution that felt increasingly specific. The sheer variety of items required to evolve certain Pokémon turned the process into a scavenger hunt, reinforcing the sense of mystery, but also making it one of the more convoluted mechanics in the series. Competitive play has always reflected these quirks. Scizor, for instance, became one of the most popular competitive Pokémon thanks to its typing, stats, and powerful moves. Yet many players who used it competitively first had to learn the obscure evolution method of trading Scyther with a metal coat. Steelix, while not always as dominant, became iconic for its massive defensive power. Slowking carved out niches in certain formats, while Politoed gained new relevance when weather mechanics made its drizzle ability valuable. Each of these evolutions, born from strange item requirements, left an impact far greater than their odd mechanics might suggest. The community has always been fascinated by item-based evolutions, trading stories of the first time they discovered one by accident. Some remember being shocked when their Onix suddenly evolved after a trade, while others puzzled over how to trigger Politoed without knowing the secret. These discoveries often spread by word of mouth, reinforcing the social nature of the games. In playground conversations, these evolutions were whispered about like myths, adding to their mystique. What makes held items and evolution items such a strange mechanic is how arbitrary they can feel. Unlike leveling or using a stone, the idea of trading while holding an item seems unnecessarily complicated, especially when the games rarely explain the process directly. And yet, it is precisely this complexity that makes them memorable. They force players to experiment, to connect with others, and to think outside the box. In doing so, they reinforce Pokémon's identity as a game of discovery, where secrets are hidden everywhere, waiting for curious trainers to stumble upon them. In the grand ranking of unusual mechanics, held items and evolution items stand as a reminder that even something as simple as growth can be wrapped in mystery. They highlight the unpredictability of the series, showing that evolution is not just about levels, but about creativity, experimentation, and, sometimes, a little confusion. These mechanics turned ordinary trades into extraordinary transformations, ensuring that the act of evolution would always carry a sense of wonder and strangeness. When discussing the strangest mechanics in Pokémon, no conversation is complete without mentioning the most infamous glitch of them all, MissingNo. Unlike other mechanics, which were carefully designed and introduced by the developers, this oddity was an accident of programming, and yet it became one of the most iconic elements of the early games, shaping the way players viewed the series and sparking decades of speculation. MissingNo appeared in the very first games, Red and Blue, as a side effect of how the developers coded wild encounters. When players performed a specific sequence, talking to the old man in Viridian City to learn how to catch Pokemon, then flying to Cinnabar Island and surfing along the coast, the game would pull encounter data from memory in a way that was never intended. Instead of generating normal Pokemon, the code sometimes produced MissingNo, a glitchy figure that looked like a scrambled block of pixels. Encountering MissingNo felt like stepping into another world. Its strange shape, distorted cries, and unusual behavior made it feel more like a ghost in the machine than a proper Pokemon. Some players were terrified, believing it might break their game, while others were fascinated by its potential. The truth was that interacting with MissingNo could indeed cause odd effects, from graphical corruption to strange item duplication. But instead of discouraging players, these quirks made it legendary. The discovery spread by word of mouth, turning it into one of the first great gaming myths of the modern era. The most famous effect tied to MissingNo was the duplication glitch. If a player encountered it under the right conditions, the item in their 6th inventory slot would be multiplied to an almost infinite amount. Suddenly, rare items like Master Balls and rare candies could be stockpiled with ease, breaking the balance of the game. For many, this was not just a curiosity but a tool, giving them power that was never intended. The strange mix of fear and excitement around MissingNo's abilities cemented its place in gaming culture. What makes MissingNo especially fascinating is that it was never meant to exist, yet it still carried elements of design. Its name itself, short for missing number, reflected the placeholder data left behind in the code. Its forms varied depending on how the glitch was triggered, with some resembling ghostly sprites or even hybrids of existing Pokemon like Rhydon or Kangaskhan. This variation made it feel unpredictable, as though the game itself was producing monsters from beyond the boundaries of the world. The lore around MissingNo has always been fan-created, since the developers never officially explained it. Some players imagined it as a forgotten Pokemon, cut during development but still lingering in the code. Others believed it was a digital ghost, haunting the cartridges of Red and Blue. Theories circulated on playgrounds, in magazines, and eventually online, each adding to its mystique. What began as a glitch became a legend, shaping the way fans thought about the hidden possibilities in their games. For many, encountering MissingNo was their first experience with the idea that games were not perfect systems, but fragile constructions held together by code. It opened the door to the concept of exploring beyond boundaries, of finding secrets hidden not by design, but by accident. In this way, MissingNo symbolized curiosity, the thrill of pushing against the edges of a digital world to see what lay beyond. The community has never forgotten it. Decades later, MissingNo continues to appear in discussions, memes, and fan art. It has been referenced in later games indirectly, with nods to glitches and oddities that echo its legacy. For players who grew up with Red and Blue, it remains a nostalgic memory, a reminder of the days when rumors and playground stories were the primary way information spread. For newer fans, it has become a piece of Pokemon history, proof that even the strangest accidents can leave lasting impressions. Mechanically, MissingNo is perhaps the strangest phenomenon in the series, because it exists entirely outside the intended design. It is not a hidden feature or a deliberate secret, but a hole in the code that players stumbled upon. And yet, it became as iconic as many official Pokemon, a testament to how much charm can come from the unexpected. In the grand collection of Pokemon's unusual mechanics, MissingNo stands apart. It was never planned, never meant to be part of the journey, and yet it became a legend all its own. It represents the mystery of the unknown, the thrill of discovery, and the joy of finding wonder in the strangest places. For many trainers, their first glimpse of that blocky sprite on the shores of Cinnabar Island was a moment they never forgot, proof that sometimes the most unusual mechanics are not the ones designed, but the ones that happen by accident. For many players, the main adventure in a Pokemon game ends once the champion has been defeated and the credits roll. But for those who continue exploring, post-game content often reveals some of the strangest and most challenging mechanics in the entire series. Chief among these is the Battle Frontier and its related facilities, which appeared in certain generations as a collection of unique challenges. Unlike the straightforward battles of the main story, these facilities introduced unusual rules, restrictions, and quirks that tested even the most experienced trainers. The Battle Tower, introduced in the second generation's Crystal version, was the first step toward this idea. Unlike ordinary battles, the Battle Tower restricted the use of certain Pokemon, limited held items, and forced players to follow stricter competitive rules. This was the first time many casual players encountered the idea of clauses rules that banned duplicate species or prevented overly powerful moves. For some, the shift was disorienting, as their story mode strategies suddenly fell apart under these new conditions. For others, it was a thrilling new way to engage with the game, forcing them to adapt and think more carefully. By the third generation's Emerald version, the idea expanded into the full Battle Frontier. Here, players could explore multiple facilities, each with its own strange twist. The Battle Factory, for example, required trainers to rent Pokemon instead of using their own. This meant that victories depended less on preparation and more on adaptability, as players had to master unfamiliar teams. For those used to relying on their personal favorites, the Battle Factory was one of the strangest experiences in the series, pushing them out of their comfort zones and into entirely new strategies. The Battle Pike introduced another unusual mechanic. Progress was tied to luck as much as skill. Players moved through a series of rooms, some filled with battles, others with status conditions or healing opportunities. The unpredictability made the Pike feel more like a gamble than a test of skill, and many players found it one of the most nerve-wracking facilities. Success often depended on how well a team could handle sudden disadvantages, like entering a room only to find their lead Pokemon poisoned before a battle even began. The Battle Pyramid added an exploration element, forcing trainers to navigate a darkened maze with limited visibility. Items and healing were scarce, and the focus was on resource management as much as battling. This blend of dungeon crawling and combat made the pyramid feel more like an entirely different genre, one that stood apart from traditional Pokemon gameplay. For many fans, it was both frustrating and unforgettable. Later games continued experimenting with these unusual facilities. The Battle Arcade in the fourth generation introduced a roulette system where random conditions could tilt the battle in favor of or against the player. Effects ranged from weather changes to free status conditions, turning every battle into a game of chance. The Battle Castle, meanwhile, gave players a currency system that could be used to heal their Pokemon or buy items between matches. These mechanics blurred the line between battling and resource management, making the facilities feel more like strategy games within the larger RPG. What made the Battle Frontier and its facilities so strange was how different they felt from the main adventure. The regular story encouraged bonding with a team, leveling up, and relying on favorite strategies. But in the frontier, those habits often led to failure. Success required adaptation, risk management, and mastery of mechanics that many players had never bothered with before. Hidden stats like EVs and IVs suddenly became essential, as did knowledge of obscure moves and items. For casual trainers, the facilities were a harsh introduction to the deeper layers of the game. For competitive players, they were a playground, a chance to test their skills in a controlled environment. The community's reaction to these facilities has always been passionate. Some players loved the challenge, celebrating the frontier as one of the series' greatest accomplishments. Others found it overwhelming or unfair, frustrated by the reliance on luck or the difficulty spikes. Even years later, debates continue over whether the battle frontier should return in future games, with many fans longing for the unique blend of strangeness and strategy it offered. From a lore perspective, the battle frontier added little, but its mechanical innovations left a lasting legacy. The idea of renting Pokémon, gambling with chance, or navigating unusual conditions transformed the way players thought about battles. These mechanics were not just about strength, but about flexibility, patience, and luck. They turned Pokémon into something closer to a puzzle, where every choice mattered and no victory was guaranteed. In the grand ranking of strange Pokémon mechanics, the Battle Frontier stands out as a bold experiment. It was not about collecting badges or defeating villains, but about pushing players to their limits through unusual challenges. Its facilities remain some of the most creative and divisive features in the series, proof that even in a game built on tradition, there is always room for innovation and surprise. While MissingNo is the most famous glitch in Pokémon history, it is far from the only one. Throughout the series, countless smaller oddities have slipped into the games, creating bizarre effects that blur the line between mistake and hidden feature. Some of these glitches became infamous among players, while others remained obscure, whispered about in forums, or shared among curious trainers who stumbled across them by chance. Alongside these are cut features mechanics coded into the games, but never fully implemented, leaving behind fragments of ideas that hint at what might have been. Together, they form one of the strangest chapters in the history of Pokémon. One of the earliest and most memorable glitches involves the Safari Zone in the Kanto games. Within this special area, players did not battle Pokémon directly, but instead threw bait, rocks, and safari balls in an attempt to capture them. On the surface, the system seemed simple. Bait would make creatures easier to keep around, but harder to catch, while rocks made them easier to catch, but more likely to flee. However, the underlying math was far stranger. The way the developers programmed it meant that bait and rocks often had unpredictable effects, sometimes making captures harder instead of easier. This oddity confused players for years, and even today, the exact mechanics are still a point of fascination for fans who study the game's code. Cloning glitches also became legends in their own right. In the second generation, players discovered that by turning off the game at just the right moment while saving, they could duplicate Pokémon or items. This risky trick became popular among trainers who wanted extra Master Balls or a full team of rare legendaries. While dangerous as it sometimes corrupted save files, the cloning glitch represented the thrill of pushing the limits of the game's systems. Later generations would see similar exploits, each one discovered by players experimenting with timing, trades, or storage systems. These glitches blurred the line between fair play and cheating, creating debates in the community about whether they were harmless fun or game-breaking exploits. Other glitches were even more obscure, like the acid armor duplication bug in the first generation. Under certain conditions, stacking defenses could cause stats to behave strangely, sometimes exceeding normal limits. These quirks often had little effect on casual play, but fascinated those who dug deep into the mechanics. They were reminders that even the most polished games carry imperfections, small cracks in the code that allow players to peek behind the curtain. Cut features, meanwhile, represent the other side of Pokemon's strangeness. These are mechanics coded into the games, but left unfinished or inaccessible. For example, data for unused moves or items often lingers in the files, hinting at ideas the developers experimented with but abandoned before release. In the early games, evidence of unused maps and areas has also been found, sparking speculation about what might have been planned for Kanto or Johto, but never realized. These remnants serve as ghostly echoes of paths not taken, fueling fan theories and what-if discussions for decades. One particularly famous cut feature involves the idea of a Pokemon Pink believed to have been planned alongside the original Pokemon Yellow. Data mined from the games suggests that Clefairy might have been intended as a mascot Pokemon before Pikachu took its place. While never confirmed officially, the evidence has fueled speculation about an alternate timeline where the franchise's most recognizable mascot was not Pikachu, but a very different creature. This possibility highlights just how close the series came to being entirely different in tone and identity. Another curious case is the evidence of unused items. Some early items appear in the code with no clear function, as though the developers experimented with mechanics that were later scrapped. These leftovers have become treasures for fans who enjoy data mining, offering glimpses into the creative process behind the games. Each discovery reinforces the idea that Pokemon is not a perfectly polished machine, but a living project shaped by trial and error. The community has always been captivated by glitches and cut features. For players who grew up before the internet, these discoveries spread through word of mouth, often exaggerated into myths. Stories of hidden Pokemon, secret areas, or powerful items circulated on playgrounds, blurring the line between fact and rumor. Even today, these legends persist as fans continue to test old cartridges and share their findings online. What was once a playground rumor is now part of the collective history of the franchise. From a competitive perspective, glitches rarely play a role since official formats do not allow them, but their cultural impact has been immense. They represent curiosity, experimentation, and the willingness of players to explore beyond the boundaries of the intended game. For many fans, discovering a glitch or learning about a cut feature feels like uncovering a secret, a reminder that even within familiar worlds, there are always hidden layers waiting to be found. In the grand list of strange Pokemon mechanics, glitches and cut features hold a unique place. They are not deliberate systems like EVs, shinies, or breeding quirks, but accidents and remnants that reveal the fragile artistry of game design. They show us that the Pokemon world is not fixed and perfect, but flexible and full of surprises, and they remind us that even in the most structured of games, strangeness can slip through the cracks, creating legends that endure for generations. Even after decades, Pokemon continues to surprise us with hidden systems, odd quirks, and mysteries tucked away in its code. These strange mechanics remind us that beneath the surface of every adventure lies a deeper world waiting to be uncovered. As you drift off, may the curiosity of these discoveries stay with you, gentle and timeless.